Chapter 1. The noise and the silence. Victor had learned to read the city the way some men read scripture, slowly, with a reverence for patterns. The streets had their psalms and denials. In the winter, the tram lines sang thin, metallic notes under the frost. In the summer, the asphalt exhaled sour breath and arguments. His patrol car moved through it all at a measured pace, like a boat cutting the film of an oil-slicked river, and he felt, as he often did at the beginning of a night shift, that he belonged more to motion than to place. He had worn the uniform for 22 years, long enough for the fabric to soften and the leather of his belt to remember his hips, long enough to trust his instincts and mistrust most explanations, long enough to hear, in the first syllable a suspect spoke, whether the night would end in paperwork or in blood. He told new recruits that the job was 2/3 listening and 1/3 timing, and he meant it. But he didn't tell them the other part, the part that had begun to gnaw at him in recent years, that sometimes the listening led nowhere, and the timing saved no one. The evening began the way good evenings did, with routine. Victor checked the patrol car, confirmed the first aid kit, tested the siren for half a second, then apologized to the night guard at the station, who flinched every time. He met his partner, Alexei, at the coffee machine that stained plastic cups with the taste of rain-soaked cardboard. They spoke of traffic, of a football match, of the lieutenant's new haircut that made him look like a frightened hedgehog. So, Alexei said, stirring sugar in a drink that already tasted of syrup, "You're on paper tonight." Victor shook his head. "We're on calls. Paper is tomorrow. If God is kind." "If God is kind," Alexei echoed, smirking. "You talk like my grandmother now." Victor didn't reply. He had taken to saying it without thinking. If God is kind. It felt like a small hinge in the mouth, a door that sometimes led to light and sometimes to nothing at all. They rolled out into the dark. The radio crackled with the usual litany, a drunk asleep in the doorway of a bakery, a neighbor dispute blooming like mold, a car with plates that didn't match its registration, a woman reporting that the man on the 4th floor had been shouting at a cat for an hour, and surely this was a crime. Traffic lights blinked red, then green, then red again, and Victor could feel the slow, patient turn of the city's heart. At 19 minutes past 8, the dispatcher sent them to a supermarket on the edge of District 7. "Shoplifting, minor. Repeat offender," the voice said. "Name S. Orlov. No violence expected." Orlov. Alexei tapped the wheel with 2 fingers. "The one who steals batteries and books." "Books?" Victor said. "Yeah. Half the time it's batteries and instant noodles. Half the time it's paperbacks from the discount rack. Tries to hide them in his coat. Hey, strange. Talks too much." They found Orlov in the manager's office, sitting in a plastic chair with his hands folded like a schoolboy called to the headmaster. He was in his 30s, thin in the way that came from more than a few missed meals, and his eyes had the unnerving stillness of someone who listened more than he spoke. A paperback lay on the desk in front of him. The cover showed a painting of a man in a storm, head lifted to a bruised sky. "You again?" the manager said to him. "You said you forgot to pay. You always say you forgot to pay." "I do forget," Orlov said, turning his head to Victor as if registering the real authority only now. "But not for the reason you think." "What reason is there?" the manager snapped. "You put a book in your coat." "I put hope where I can," Orlov murmured. Alexei rolled his eyes. Victor did not. He read the short report the security guard had typed, then crouched so that he was level with Orlov's gaze. "Name? Sergei Anatolyevich Orlov. You've been here before, yes? You know the process, yes? Is that book yours?" Victor asked. "It wants to be," Orlov said, and the faintest of smiles moved his mouth. "If wanting were enough, I would be a saint." "You're a comedian," the manager muttered. "Stand up," Victor said. Orlov obeyed. Victor patted him down with the practiced tenderness of someone who had learned that roughness gave less information than patience. From the inside pocket, he drew two batteries and, oddly, a small wooden cross on a string, worn smooth by thumb and time. He placed them on the desk. "Anything else?" "Not much," Orlov said. "But I have a story." "Save it for the station," Alexei said. At the desk, they logged the items and the charge. Orlov did not resist. He met each instruction without hurry, without complaint. He even thanked the manager for the plastic chair. On the way to the car, snow began to fall, not the thick kind that muffled everything at once, but the dry, hesitant dust that made the air taste like old chalk. Orlov tilted his face up to it, as if learning a word again. "You're not from District 7, he said as Victor opened the back door. "We go where they send us," Victor replied. "And where does that send you?" Orlov asked no one in particular. "I suppose we all learned the answer the hard way." In the car, Alexei drove. Victor watched Orlov in the rearview mirror. The man's hands rested on his knees. His knuckles were scabbard, a sign not of violence, but of cold and clumsiness. His lips moved, but no sound came. Praying, talking to himself, rehearsing a defense. Victor could not tell. He felt like a splinter that both irritated and fascinated. The sense that this was not going to be a normal shoplifting case. At the station, processing took longer than it should have because the computer froze, and the clerk who knew the trick for unfreezing it went out for a cigarette and did not return. Orlov sat where he was told to sit, obeyed when told to stand, turned his pockets inside out like a magician, revealing that the hat was empty. The batteries clinked mournfully into the evidence tray. When Victor asked him about an address, Orlov gave one that was partly demolished, a building that had been condemned last year. When Victor pointed this out, Orlov nodded and said, "Yes, it's hard to live there." "What do you do?" Victor asked. "Breathe," Orlov said simply. "And read when I can. Work sometimes. Carry boxes. People always need boxes carried." "And the cross?" Victor nodded at the small wooden thing on the table. He did not know why he asked. "It was my mother's," Orlov said. "She said it taught the faith. I didn't understand until recently." Alexei sighed in a theatrical way. "You'll have a night in the holding cell, Sergei Anatolyevich. Maybe it will teach your palm to keep itself out of other people's pockets." "Maybe," Orlov agreed, and then he looked at Victor. "You don't enjoy this part." "What part is that?" Victor said, keeping his voice bland, professional. "The part where a man is small," Orlov replied. "You don't like to see it." "Some do. You don't." Victor said nothing. He finished the report, took Orlov's shoelaces as policy required, and escorted him to the holding cell that smelled of old rain and disinfectant. The door shut with the thick, unmusical thud of institutional closures. As Victor turned away, Orlov said, "Officer, yes, there is a verse I'd like to remember, but I am not allowed a book. Would you hear it so I can keep it, just for tonight?" "We're not a library," Orlov Alexei called from the end of the corridor. Victor waited. Some nights were long, and this did not feel like one in which speed would buy peace. "Say it," he said. Orlov closed his eyes. "The sacrifices of God are a broken spirit, a broken and a contrite heart," he faltered, struggled, then found the words again. "O God, thou wilt not despise." He opened his eyes. The corridor light turned them pale. "I always forget the middle." Psalm 51, Victor said, surprising himself. He had not thought of that number in years. Orlov smiled in a way that asked no favor. "Then at least I remember the address." Victor turned away first. They released Orlov in the morning with a court date and a warning. The manager did not press the charge hard. Perhaps because the book was returned, pristine enough to sell again. Perhaps because it is easier to be generous after sleep. The day shift took over. Victor went home. He lived alone now. His marriage had dissolved years earlier in a gentle disaster, more like sugar melting than a cup shattering. There had been no affair, no last scene. There had been a child, Elena, who lived with her mother in a quieter part of the city and texted Victor pictures of dogs she met on the street. He answered each one with a heart. He kept the apartment clean. He cooked the same 3 meals. He read the paper at the table, not because he trusted it to tell him the truth of things, but because he liked the weight of it in his hands. He slept 3 hours, woke to a dream of a corridor where every door was a mirror, and then did not sleep again. He made tea and, without quite knowing why, he took down the small Bible that lived on the highest shelf of his bookcase among dictionaries and field manuals. It had been given to him years ago by an old woman whose son he had arrested for beating his wife. "For you," she had said at the threshold, pressing it into his hand while her son shouted in the stairwell, "so that you will remember that you are not only the hand, but sometimes the voice." He had not opened it often. The print was small and the paper thin, like the skin of prune-dried hands. But now he turned to Psalm 51 and read the whole thing, mouth moving without sound, the way Olaf had in the car. He did not feel comfort. He did not feel much of anything. But something in the last verse stuck. "Restore unto me the joy of thy salvation, and uphold me with thy free spirit." Joy, he thought. When had that left? When had he mislaid it like an umbrella on a bus? He put the book back and went to shower. The water beat his shoulders as if trying to loosen a knot tied by hands older than his own. He dressed and returned to the station before dusk. The lieutenant assigned them to District 3 that night. "There's a shelter on Rybatskaya," he said. "They've been calling about fights in the queue. And a warehouse reported missing copper piping. Check with the scrap dealer on Karpinskaya. He always knows more than his scales say." They checked both and found, at the shelter, 3 men arguing about a cigarette and a seat, and, at the scrap dealer, a scale that suddenly decided to be accurate when Victor announced head, "Call the inspector." It was the kind of night that looked respectable in a ledger: 2 interventions, 1 warning, 0 injuries. They ate pilaf from paper containers in the car and listened to a radio show in which callers confessed their pettiness. "I lied about liking my mother-in-law's soup. I overwatered my neighbor's flowers. I hate my boss." Laugh. The host laughed a lot and blessed them all. Near midnight, the dispatcher called again. "Patrol 7 to 3, disturbance at Street Nicholas Church on Lermontov. Pastor reports a break-in. No suspect on scene. Respond." "Copy," Victor said. Alexei flicked on the lights, but not the siren. The city had learned to get out of the way of that flashing red, like blood pulsing under the lid of an eye. They arrived to find the old oak door intact, but the side window shattered from a thrown stone. The priest, a thin man in a black cassock, his hair too long and his face oddly youthful, in the cold stood with a broom and dustpan, sweeping glass into the light of a single candle set on the window ledge. "I called some time ago," he said, apologetic. "I began cleaning because I couldn't bear to see the glass on the floor." "It's better we see it undisturbed," Alexei began. But Victor raised a hand. The priest stopped, broom mid-arc. "We'll need to take a statement," Victor said. "Did you see anyone?" "No," the priest said. Or rather, he hesitated. "I felt someone." "Is that useful?" "Sometimes," Victor said. They took the statement by the warm tile stove near the altar. The church smelled of beeswax and old wood and something Victor could not name that made him think of his grandmother's kitchen. The priest spoke simply. "A stone. A window. A choking sound of glass. We are insured," he said. "The break itself is not the wound. The intention is the wound." "We'll patrol more often here for a few weeks," Victor said, writing. "It may have been random. It may have been," the priest agreed. "And yet I have learned that very little is random, and almost nothing is pointless, even what wounds. Light can find us through a broken thing." Victor thought of Orlov speaking of broken spirits in the corridor. He glanced at the window. The candle flame bent in the draught, then rebounded, holding its shape with a dignity that made the air itself seem humble. "Well, need the stone," Victor said, walking to the window. It lay among the glass shards, like a heart among bones. He lifted it with 2 fingers into an evidence bag. His hand caught on something else, not glass, not stone. A torn corner of paper, wet and stubborn. He teased it loose. A fragment of a book page, printed in a font he recognized from the city library's oldest stacks. Across the scrap ran a single half-sentence. "And do thou remember me when thou comest into thy kingdom." He brought it to the priest. The man's eyes softened. "Ah," he said, "the thief on the cross. A good prayer for thieves and policemen alike." "Policemen?" Alexei laughed once. "We're not thieves." "No," the priest said. "Forgive me. I meant only that we are all beggars asking for a memory that heals us." When they finished, the priest wrapped a piece of bread in a napkin and gave it to each of them. "You'll be hungry before you are home," he said. "Bless you for coming." "We're paid to come," Alexei said, but he ate the bread on the porch, steam rising from his mouth in the cold. Victor put the fragment of the page in his notebook. He did not know why. 3 nights later, Orlov came back into Victor's life the way tragedies and parables arrived, at inconvenient hours and with the wrong tone. It was 3:11 when the dispatcher's voice lifted strangely, like a singer moving to a key he couldn't hold. "Patrol 7 to 3. Assault at the corner of Burson and Karla Marxa. Ems en route. Suspect restrained by bystanders. Victim conscious. Uniform presence requested." They turned onto Burson and saw the knot of shapes under the pharmacy sign. 3 men, a woman in a coat over pajamas, a teenager holding a bicycle like a shield, a body on the ground curled around itself. The suspect, if that was the right word, was pressed against the wall by 2 of the men, and he was bleeding from the lip, but not struggling. Victor moved toward the body on the ground. The woman said, "He jumped in. He stopped it. He took the punch." "What happened?" Alexei asked, taking control of the scene with gestures that Victor trusted more than he trusted a lot of language. They pieced it together in the halogen glare. A drunk man had been kicking at the pharmacy door with the wild logic of those in pain. He had turned on the teenager when told to stop, and the suspects a gay Orlov. Of course it had stepped between them, taken the punch meant for the boy, and wrapped the drunk in a hold that looked more like a hug than a restraint, until the bystanders pulled them apart. "You," Victor said, not meaning it as a question. "Me," Orlov said, teeth pink with blood. He wiped his lip with the back of his hand and winced. His eyes were clear. "I was going to the shelter. They serve soup at 3. The drunk man didn't want soup. He wanted to break the door until someone gave him medicine for a pain no door could heal. He was going to break the boy's face. I have nothing worth much, but I had a moment, so I gave it." The ambulance arrived. The teenager's wrist was sprained, not broken. The drunk wept himself into sleep on the gurney and apologized to everyone, including the bicycle. Orlov refused medical treatment apart from a wipe for his lip and a stern look from the paramedic, who said, "Next time, hero doc. We're going to need your statement," Victor said. "Of course," Orlov said. He glanced at the pharmacy door. It bore shallow scuffs, like a scratched skin. It is good that some doors don't break easily. Back at the station, Victor poured him water. Orlov drank without haste. Victor leaned one hip against the desk. "What were you going to steal this time?" he asked, not unkindly. "Sleep," Orlov said, smiling. "It's always easiest to steal from yourself. And the soup. It is not stealing when it is given," Orlov said. He hesitated, then added, "Officer Victor, I think you have been carrying a stone in your chest. It is heavy. You could put it down here, you know." "How would I know your name?" Orlov asked himself in a whisper, and then he looked chagrined. "Forgive me. You told me last time. Or someone did. Or perhaps I only guessed. You look like a Victor. It means victory. It means a lot of things, Victor said. He took down the statement. The details precise and spare time. Place. Number of blows. Witnesses. He logged it. He was about to send Orlov out into the fragile morning when the man said, "May I sit in the chapel for a moment?" "There's no chapel here," Alexei said, amused. Orlov looked surprised. "But the corridor where the light falls, the picture of Saint Michael over the bench, that's just a print someone's aunt donated," Alexei said, still amused. Orlov turned to Victor. "You know the place I mean?" Victor did. At the end of the hallway, near the evidence room, a narrow window let in the dawn, and someone had hung a print of an angel with a sword over the scuffed bench where suspects sometimes waited for a social worker. The janitor kept that corner oddly clean. It did feel, in the early hours, like the lobby of a better building. Victor said, 5 minutes. Orlov went and sat there with his hands folded. He didn't bow his head. He didn't cross himself. He simply looked at the light the way people look at water when they are very thirsty and not sure they are allowed to drink. When the 5 minutes had become 10, Victor went to fetch him. Orlov stood as he approached, his face as calm as if he had slept 8 hours and woken in a good bed. "Thank you," he said. "You have given me back something small, and it is enough." "What did we give you?" Alexei called from the desk, scratching a note in the logbook. "A place to remember who I am not," Orlov answered, and then, to Victor alone, "You picked up a page at the church. I think it was for you." "How would you know that?" Victor asked, sharp without intending to be. Orlov's smile contained no triumph. "Because I have learned something about God lately. He wastes very little, and he aims well." "Did you break that window?" Victor asked suddenly. He didn't know why he asked, only that the question seemed to have been waiting in his mouth. "No," Orlov said, and the no was simple as bread. "But I have broken many things, and I have asked him to remember me when he comes into his kingdom." He left. The station clock said 4:32. Victor felt the familiar grit of exhaustion in his eyes. And yet he also felt a thread of alertness drawing him through the fatigue like a silver line through dark cloth. He sat at the bench under St. Michael and took the fragment of the page from his notebook. He read it. He did not, this time, fail to feel. In the weeks that followed, Victor saw Orlov twice more. Once at the shelter where he was washing trays with a humming that was almost, but not quite, a hymn, and once on the tram, where he stood to give his seat to a woman whose belly announced the future like a flag. Each time, Orlov greeted him without surprise, as if they were comrades in a war that had not yet been declared. Each time, Victor said almost nothing, because what he wanted to say had not yet found its words. He told no one about the psalm or the page or the 5 minutes under the angel. He did his job. He wrote reports. He walked into apartments where the air was the shape of a fight and asked it to be a different shape. He drove past Street Nicholas and saw the new pane of glass shining a little too clearly among its older brothers. On a Thursday of grey rain, they were sent to a tenement on Combe Street where the neighbors complained of shouting and a smell. The smell was gas, faint but distinct. The shouting was not human. It was the television, turned to a volume that made the neighbors imagine a crowd of angry actors. They cut the gas at the main and forced the door. Inside, an old man lay on the floor with a bruise like a map of an unknown country blooming on his cheek. He had fallen, then hit the knob of the stove in the fall. He was breathing. He was embarrassed. "Nothing," he said, as if naming the injury could make it so. "I am fine. I was watching the match." "The match ended yesterday," Alexei said dryly. They opened the windows, checked the valves, called EMS to be safe. As they waited, Victor noticed a small table near the window, its paint worn to wood at the corners. On it lay a thin book with a cardboard cover, its title ridged in gold that caught the rainlight, The Gospel of Luke. He picked it up and saw, on the inside cover, a name written in a careful hand, Sergei. Orlov. He turned the book to show the old man. Is Sergei here? He was, the old man said. He comes to read to me on Thursdays. But today he did not come. He is ill. He sent me this last week and said, you can read it yourself, Alexander Petrovich. I said, I can't see half the time. He said, then I will sit and read while you listen. Is he staying here? Victor asked. No, the old man said. He is not allowed to stay anywhere for long. He says it helps him to remember that home is a promise and not a place. Are you his friend? I'm a policeman, Victor said. Then perhaps you are his friend, the old man said simply. Ems arrived. They took the old man to be checked, more for the gas than the bruise. Victor pocketed the address written in the front of the gospel, another demolition site, but with a note below it, if undeliverable, please return to the shelter on Rybatskaya, C.O. Moshe. He did not know why this felt like a map. He did not know why maps should feel both like grief and like guidance. That night, when the city wrapped itself in the noise that passes for sleep, Victor parked the patrol car outside the shelter and told Alexei he needed 5 minutes. Alexei grunted. Say hello to your saint, he said. Inside, the shelter smelled of cabbage soup and soap. A woman with a red scarf and a tired kindness asked what he needed. Sergei Orlov, Victor said. I found his book at a call. I wanted to return it. He is in his bed, she said. But he may be asleep. He has been coughing. The doctor came yesterday and said it was nothing. But I do not trust men who say that when the chest sounds like paper tearing. The dormitory was a long room of beds divided by curtains that held the silhouettes of other people's nights. Orlov lay on his side, facing the wall, and the cough that came from him was dry and thin and shaped like a blade. Victor waited until a gap in the cough allowed him to speak. Sergei, he said softly. Orlov rolled onto his back. Even in the shelter's half-light, his eyes were clear. Officer Victor, he said, as if greeting a colleague at a shift change. You brought me my book. It was yours, Victor said, holding it up. Left with Alexander Petrovich. I left it for him, Orlov said. But I have learned that the things I leave often find their way back to teach me. Will you sit? Victor sat on the metal chair that bent slightly under his weight. He set the book on his knee. Why do you carry this one? He asked. Luke. Because Luke listens, Orlov said. He writes like a man listening to the heart under the noise. He notices women and children and servants. He notices tables and the food on them. He notices the ones other men call small. And you? Victor asked, because somehow it felt like an honest place to put the question. Who notices you? Orlov's smile was brief and almost shy. He does, he said, and tapped the book. And lately you do. Forgive me. That sounds like presumption. But you stood under the angel with me. Victor did not ask how Orlov knew. He did not ask why that felt like a confession better than any he had heard in a police interview room. He opened the book and, without planning, read aloud, and one of the malefactors which were hand-railed on him. Sighing, his voice caught. He began again, slower, as if learning to walk with a wound that time could not speed. When he reached the thief's request to be remembered, something loosened in him. Something like a knot that had held a soul wrong for years. I have arrested many men, Victor said, closing the book. I have heard their lies and their truths. I have forgotten too many of their faces. I do not know what I am doing, Sergei. You are reading, Orlov said gently, and that is sometimes the first prayer. Do you believe, Victor asked, surprising himself again with the nakedness of it, that a man can be made new? Yes, Orlov said. He coughed once, a small, hard sound, but not by rules alone. Rules draw the lines. Love redraws the man. You stole a book, Victor said. I did, Orlov replied. And then I learned I didn't need to steal this one. It was already being given. They were quiet for a while. In the bed beyond the curtain, someone murmured a name, as if calling a dog home. Outside, a tram sighed on its rails. The shelter breathed its human breath. Orlov closed his eyes, and Victor thought he slept, but then the voice came, thin and steady in the dark. Officer Victor. Victor. He corrected himself. I have been many things. A thief, a liar, a son who arrived too late to hear his mother speak her last word, a man who thought hunger made him honest because it made him pay attention. I thought faith would make me someone else, but it made me more myself. I want that for you. What do you know of me? Victor asked, but the question had no anger in it. I know you carry the law like a lamp, Orlov said, but lamps need oil, and your oil is almost gone. I have seen men snuff their light on purpose. Do not do that. Go where the oil is. Where is it? Victor asked. Forgiveness, Orlov said, as if the word itself was simple and edible. Not for what you have done, but for what has been done to you by the world. You have watched too much breaking. You think your hands can only hold the broken, but they can also bless. Victor did not ask how policeman blessed. He did not say that he had no right to that language. He held the book and felt, through the cheap cardboard, the weight of its pages like a sleeping bird. He stood, because he could not sit any longer. The chair sighed with a relief that sounded almost human. I will come again, he said. I will be here, Orlov said. Unless I am not, then I will be elsewhere, and it will still be fine. Victor left the shelter and walked out into a rain that had decided to be honest and fall hard. He did not rush to the car. He let the water find the face the city had made of him and try to wash some of it away. He was not changed. He was not saved. But the stone in his chest felt, for the first time in years, something like the beginning of sand. At the car, Alexei looked at him and grunted. You're wet. I noticed, Victor said. You and your saint, Alexei muttered, starting the engine. One day you'll tell me what you see. One day, Victor said, and the words did not feel like a lie. He did not sleep after his shift. He sat at his kitchen table with the Gospel of Luke and the Psalm open side by side and read them without hurry, like a man who had been starving and finally trusted the food not to be taken away. When the light came, thin and unmusical through the blinds, he whispered into the quiet apartment, "Remember me," and he did not specify who he wanted to remember him, because the words knew better than he did. Outside, the city lifted its tired head and began again. Inside, Victor began again, too barely, awkwardly, with the delicate wrongness of a first step after a long sitting. He put on his uniform and tightened his belt and, for reasons he could not have explained, slipped the small Bible into the inside pocket of his jacket, where it pressed against his heart like a hand. He was not ready for priesthood. He was not ready for anything but the next call. But for the first time in a long time, the next call did not feel like a sentence. It felt like a summons. And though he would not have used that word, not yet, it was the right one. He locked the door and went to the car. The city sang its thin song. He listened, and somewhere in the listening, the silence began to answer back. Chapter to rewritten. The long winter of choices. The winter did not merely arrive, it laid claim. Pavements kept a thin rime of failure that never quite melted. Doors swelled against their frames, and voices came out in little white ghosts that fled as soon as they were born. Victor learned the seasons, knew grammar boots that squeaked when the salt was fresh, radios that cracked with static in the cold, a city that carried its shoulders up around its ears. He also learned the changed geometry of his nights. The patrol grid was the same on paper, but his attention bent, again and again, toward the places where Sergei Orlov might appear. The shelter with its steam of cabbage and detergent, the soup line behind street. Nicholas, the tram stop where a charity handed out mittens that tried valiantly to be warm. He told himself it was routine community policing, a phrase big enough to hide in, yet somewhere in the honest part of him, He knew he was tracing the outline of a man who had become, against every rule, important. One market snow, bread, and a fragile coin. The market didn't close for winter, it merely condensed. Stalls huddled together like animals in a storm. The bread seller's breath steamed above loaves, with crusts like dark roofs. A woman hammered nails through the soles of her child's boots with a small, brave stubbornness that made Victor want to look away. Again, the bread seller said when Victor approached, "He pays, but he's always short." Not by much, like a man measuring his own heartbeat and missing one. "Where?" Victor asked. She didn't point. She looked instead. Victor followed her eyes. Orlov stood not in line, but at the fringe, as if the concept of belonging to a sequence of human desire troubled him. His hands were inside his sleeves. His cheeks had been rasped by the cold until the skin learned a new, wind-invented red. "Sergei," Victor said, and the name made a small, unmistakable warmth in his mouth. "Officer Victor," Orlov replied, as if they were meeting at a conference where everyone's role had been politely printed on a badge. "I am practicing mathematics. I am poor at it." "How much are you short?" "2 coins, Orlov said. "But they are not the same coin. One is the price. The other," he glanced at the line of people, "the steam, the rhythm of exchange. The other is the coin I do not possess, permission." "From whom?" Victor asked. "From myself," Orlov said simply. Victor put a small bill on the plank. 2 loaves, he told the seller. 1 for him, 1 for the next in line. He didn't look to see who the next was. He had learned that anonymity sometimes made generosity lighter to carry. "You will put this in your report?" Orlov asked, almost teasing. "I don't write reports about bread," Victor said. "You should," Orlov replied. "It is a kind of peace." They ate at the end of the store under a swaying string of dead bulbs. The bread did what bread always does when it is honest, made the mouth remember hunger and gratitude in the same bite. "Zacchaeus," Orlov said after a minute, as if resuming a paused conversation. "He paid back more than he took. I have nothing to pay with but hours and listening. I try to give those." "You could also not take," Victor said. "That is a better arithmetic," Orlov agreed. "I am learning slowly." He coughed then, thin and metal-edged. The cough had a mind of its own. It interrupted sentences like a rude guest and left him smaller after each arrival. Victor watched the way Orlov's shoulders curled protectively around his chest and felt the strange, helpless irritation that comes when a thing you cannot fight insists on fighting you. "You need a clinic," he said. "I have one," Orlov said. "It is called Mashe scolding me at the shelter." He smiled. "But I will go to the doctor. I am not ready to be finished." "Good," Victor said. "Good," Orlov echoed, as if confirming a contract. To station talk, locker room laughter, and the little chapel that isn't. Alexei found his partner's generosity amusing in the way men find dangerous things adorable in other men. "You are adopting a thief," he said in the locker room. "Shall I knit you both matching hats?" "I bought bread," Victor said. "That is not adoption. That is civilization. Civilization is what keeps us from becoming the things we arrest," Alexei said, buckling his belt. "But be careful. The line is thin, and winter makes it thinner." The station had a corner that tried to be gentle. The narrow window, the print of St. Michael, the bench that carried more weighting than would ought to carry. Victor found himself pausing there, on his way to the evidence room, not out of superstition, but because the light in the early morning made the dust visible, and visible dust made him remember flesh. The pictures saw did not make him think of force. It made him think of a surgeon's scalpel and how cutting sometimes saved. On one of those pauses, the janitor, a woman with forearms like rope and eyes that had seen men cry without being surprised, said, "You stand here like you've lost an earring." "I've lost something," Victor said. "It is usually not here," she said. "But people like to begin here. It feels safe to admit the losing under a picture where an angel can be blamed for finding." does he find? Sometimes we find each other, she said, and pushed her bucket on. 3 shelter nights, soup, psalms, and the grammar of mercy. The shelter's dorm was a study in plural, snores orchestrated in conflicting tempos, the wet cough of January, whisper arguments conducted under blankets as if secrecy could make need smaller. Marche wore the red scarf like a flag of a country that refused to surrender. She greeted Victor with the smile of someone who had decided, firmly, that help was a verb that needed no adjectives. He is worse today, she said, meaning Orlov without naming him. He sleeps like a man trying to outrun something slow. Orlov lay with his face turned toward the wall, as if he had discovered news there. He woke when Victor sat. The waking made his features reorganized themselves from the soft anonymity of sleep to the sharpness of recognition. You came, he said, as if stating a weather fact. You asked. I asked nothing, Orlov said gently. I merely hoped out loud. They spoke in the low murmur voice of rooms where other people's pain sleeps lightly. Orlov asked for a Psalm, not Psalm 51 this time, but the one about the man who dwells in the secret place of the Most High. Victor read. The words made a scaffold in the air, thin and improbable, but enough to hang a little courage on. Do you believe this? Victor asked when he was done. Belief is sometimes a posture, Orlov said. When I cannot stand, I lie down in it. Do you want a priest? Victor asked. I want a friend, Orlov said. The priest can come tomorrow. Today I want someone to tell me that the world is still turning toward morning. It is, Victor said. And only when he said it did he realize he believed it. For workday, calls that don't make the news between those nights and beds and psalms, Victor still did the job, which has its own liturgy. He knocked on doors where the yelling had stopped just before they arrived, and the woman with swelling under one eye said, "Everything is fine," 10 different ways. He stood by while a locksmith explained to a man that changing a lock does not change a life. He wrote a traffic citation for a man whose day was already ruined and received, in return, a monologue about the decay of civilization that was impressive in its scope and entirely unrelated to speed limits. Do you ever feel like a bucket under a leaking roof? He asked Alexei, cruising past the river that wore a skin of opaque glass. Buckets have purpose, Alexei said. And handles. We have handles, Victor said. We do, Alexei agreed. They are called names. Do you ever want a different handle? Alexei glanced at him. What are you asking me, Vitya? I don't know, Victor said. It was increasingly his most honest sentence. 5. The vendor with violets. The thief with an apology. Not all scenes were grey. There was the flower vendor, who still sold violets in winter because the greenhouse in her brother's village was honest and stubborn. A boy tried to steal a bundle. She caught his sleeve with a laugh that contained no malice and said, "If you're going to court a girl, take to one for her mother." The boy blushed so hard the coal backed away. Victor paid for both and handed them over. The boy's apology was awkward and large and sincere, as if he had discovered a new language and wanted to try every syllable. Why did you pay? Alexei asked later. I wanted the apology to be free, Victor said. You're becoming a priest already, Alexei muttered, half joke, half warning. Maybe I am only remembering how to be human, Victor said. 6. The clinic. X-rays like moth wings. Marche bullied Orlov into a clinic visit. Victor rearranged his patrol to arrive there by coincidence. The doctor had the exquisitely tired face of men who say difficult things with gentleness. He didn't like the X-ray. He didn't like the cough that had learned endurance. He did like the way Orlov listened. It is not the worst, the doctor said, but it is stubborn. You must be more stubborn. I am capable of stubborn, Orlov said, coughing delicately to prove the point. He will need rest, the doctor told Marche. I will buy some, Marche said, and the doctor did not argue with the economics of that impossible sentence. In the corridor, Victor and the doctor shared the kind of conversation men share when one believes in measurable things and the other is learning to believe in what cannot be grasped. He respects you, the doctor said. He convinces everyone to respect him, Victor replied. That is not what I mean, the doctor said. He listens when you speak. That is a rare obedience. Obedience, Victor repeated, surprised into the word. To hope, the doctor said, and went to write prescriptions for medicines the shelter would afford only by rearranging mercy elsewhere. 7 storm night, glass, siren, and the choice not to run the snowstorm arrived theatrical and immediate, enclosing the city in a white privacy that made even crimes seem smaller. Calls slowed. Streets became geography again. At 2 in the morning, a siren bloomed not from Victor's car, but from somewhere internal, the way panic sometimes blossoms, as if it had been growing silently for weeks. Shelter, he said aloud. Why? Alexei asked, drowsy-eyed behind the wheel. Because some things break in storms, Victor said, which was both true and useless. They found the shelter breathing raggedly, pipes angry, windows shivering, the door propped open by a broom because the latch had decided to keep its own counsel. Inside, chaos had the form of kindness moving quickly. Mache directing beds away from the draftmen, sharing blankets without ceremony, and volunteer boiling water like a general boiling strategy. Orlov wasn't in his bunk. For a moment, fear made the inner ear ring. Then Victor saw him near the door, standing as if his body could add its weight to the fragile hinge of the world. You should be in bed, Victor said, aware of the futility. Sometimes the bed is elsewhere, Orlov said, eyes bright with fever and some not entirely ordinary joy. Tonight it is by the door. Why? Because the door is where the cold argues, Orlov said. And I have become fond of arguing politely. They wrestled the door's pride back into its frame together, a practical liturgy that ended in the small omen of a latch catching. When it was done, Orlov leaned back against the wall, breath soared into him in rough strokes. You will kill yourself like this, Victor said, and there was no policeman in the sentence, only a man who had decided he would like another man to continue. We will all kill ourselves somehow, Orlov said, smiling. Some with food, some with work, some with despair. Tonight I pick love. Pick bed, Victor said. Bed is love's cousin, Orlov conceded, and allowed himself to be steered. 8 fever talk, the inventory of regrets fever makes philosophers. Orlov's sentences loosened into a poetry that learned its meter from breath. I once took a watch from a sleeping man, he said. He had fallen on a bench with the kind of exhaustion that looks like surrender. I took it because I was angry that his time kept working when mine had stopped. I sold it for bread and hated the bread for tasting of hours that were not mine. You can return a watch, Victor said. You cannot return the taste. No, Orlov agreed. But I can refuse to eat that taste again. He confessed small things and large, not to be absolved by the law but to be seen by a friend. He told the story of the man in the prison who had read scripture aloud as if he could smuggle the words through the bars. He told of his mother's hands making dumplings with a ferocity that made even flour respect her. He told of the way winter simplifies hunger, warmth, shelter, merciful notes that made a chord large enough to hold a life. When you leave the force, Orlov said suddenly, not asking whether, but when, you will feel naked. I will wear a cassock, Victor said, surprising himself with the present tense and the joke. Clothes are the easy part, Orlov said. Your hands will not know what to do. They are used to closing. You will have to teach them opening. How? By blessing, Orlov said simply. I don't know how to bless, Victor said. You read to a sick man, Orlov said. That is the beginning of every blessing. 9-station friction. The rumor of grace. It is difficult to keep a tenderness secret in institutions built to prefer hardness. The rumor that Victor cared in a way that was not merely professional about a thief reached places rumors are drawn to. The locker room, The break room, the mouths of men who kept their own hearts safe by laughing at other men's. You carrying him to church next? Someone asked. If I carry him anywhere, it will be to a doctor, Victor replied. You've changed, someone else said. Not quite accusation, not quite admiration. Perhaps I have remembered, Victor said, and they had the decency to look puzzled rather than cruel. Alexei watched, said little, and finally, in the car on a dull afternoon where the only excitement was a cat who had learned to open a grocery's automatic door, asked, Are you leaving me? I am not a wife, Victor said. You are a partner, Alexei replied, and the weight of the word was not small. I need to know if I should find another. You will need another, Victor said quietly. Not because I do not love this work, but because I love something else more. What? Alexei asked, and the question wasn't derision anymore. Mercy, Victor said, and the car filled with the strange, shy courage of a man naming his love out loud. Alexei drove to blocks in silence and then said, Then don't do a half thing. If you go, go. I don't know how to go, Victor admitted. You'll learn, Alexei said. You are stubborn. And winter teaches. 10 death without drama. And the words that stayed when the end came. It was undramatic in the way most real endings are. No trumpet. No sudden revelation that reinvented physics. Just breath that decided it had fulfilled its count. Mashe called Victor at a wrong hour with a voice that had learned how to speak while crying without advertising the fact. He asked me to tell you, she said, and the sentence took a moment to finish crossing the room from her mouth to the phone. He said, Tell the officer, remember me when you come into your kingdom. Victor said thank you because there was nothing else his tongue could organize. He sat in his car for a while and watched the steering wheel, which had never looked so unnecessary. Somewhere, a church bell did its job. Somewhere, a kettle boiled. Somewhere, a man chose not to shout. The city continued. It is a cruelty and a mercy that it does. He went to the shelter. He touched the pillow where Orlov's head had engraved a brief history. He took the small wooden cross that Mashe pressed into his palm and felt how a thumb had taught the wood a groove. He said the prayer he knew and the one he didn't know, which were the same prayer said in different languages. On his way out, he paused, as he always did, at the St. Michael print in the station corridor. Though he was not at the station, the mind makes its own places. He sat on the bench, which was not there, and held the cross, which was. Remember me, he said, and didn't specify who he was addressing, because Orlov had already taught him that the arrow knew its target without the archer naming it aloud. 11. Leaving the badge. Learning the cassock. There are official ways to stop being a policeman. They involve forms with boxes that must be filled with the unimaginative truth, name, years served, reason for departure. He wrote, retirement. He did not write, obedience. He did not write, a thief gave me a map. The lieutenant offered desk work with good hours. The captain offered a speech that tried to be kind and landed somewhere near bewildered. Alexei offered a hug that was not sophisticated, but did not need to be. You'll be bad at pretending not to be a policeman, Alexei said. I will keep the part that was good, Victor said. What part was that? Alexei asked, partly to know, partly to honor. The part that believed people could stop being the worst thing they did, Victor said. The seminary smelled like paper and old wood and soup, which is to say it smelled like any place where people learn to be different. Victor found himself a beginner again. He had to learn habits that did not involve sirens, morning prayers that felt at first like theater, study that humbled him with its refusal to end. Silence that did not mean the same thing here as it did in a police car at 3 in the morning. In a class on pastoral care, they role-played conversations with imaginary people whose pain was real enough to make the exercise unnecessary. You do not fix, the instructor said. You accompany. Fixing often flatters the fixer. Accompanying honors the one who walks. Victor wrote it down and then laughed because his hand had already learned those words under a winter window next to a bench that had decided to be a chapel. On weekends, he swept floors at street. Nicholas and discovered that brooms teach you as much about prayer as books do. He kept in his pocket the torn page he had found months earlier. He did not know if it was superstition to carry it. He did know that some scraps outweigh volumes. 12 first blessings, first confessions, first quiet. When he was finally ordained down, the word felt too large and too simple. He returned to a parish that had no romance about it, noisy, poor in the way that produces noise, rich in the way that produces gratitude when the hot water works. He lit candles with hands that had learned the weight of cuffs and found the new weight preferable. A man confessed that he had cheated his brother. A woman confessed that she hated her daughter-in-law with a vigor that frightened her. A boy confessed that he had stolen a phone and slept with the knowledge like a stone in his mouth. Victor listened. He did not fix. He accompanied. He gave what the church calls absolution, which is a word that did not feel like his to give until he spoke it and found that he was merely the mouth of a mercy larger than grammar. Sometimes he told them about a thief who became his teacher. He did not turn the story into a trick for tears. He told it plain. People, he found, are hungry for plain. After services, he sat near the back with the kind of exhaustion that is not emptiness but use. He touched the small cross in his pocket until his thumb found the groove again. Outside, the city recalibrated itself from winter toward the fragile mathematics of spring. Pigeons forgot they were ugly. A woman laughed on a phone and didn't apologize to the street for joy. The market's bread smelled impatient again. The flower vendor sold violets without irony. Inside, Father Victor said the same words he had once said in a shelter bed where a man was learning how to die and a friend was learning how to live. Remember me. He did not stop. He did not need to. Remembering, he had discovered, was not only the work of God. It was the work of men like him who had once believed that law could finish what love began and had found, finally, the correct sequence.